T.R.O.N podcast listeners, the randomness of nothing always tries to dive into the worlds of entrepreneurs, creatives, and people who walk their own different path in life. And I want to bring a special guest today, the host of the MC Anime podcast, Mr. Maison Collawn. Thank you very much, sir, for joining me.
How you doing today? Nice
Good,
to be here.
Yeah, good. We messaged back and forth a couple times, and you have a really interesting career trajectory. You're a social media kind of, savant, carving out a really good niche in space. And you also talk about fantasy, anime. You kind of carved out your own niche. So tell me a little bit about your background.
So yeah, background-wise, I have been social media manager for the longest time. I had an interest in TV communications, or mass communication, which was TV production. And then I did a blog, which is Blog MC Anime, hosting my content, making articles, 200 plus entries. After that, I soon found out that wasn't the best. So I went to live streaming of older blogs, and that got me into like the video space. Then I thought, I was like, well, let's just do an audio podcast at first. And then that turned into a video podcast called MC Anime Podcast.
Yeah. So let's dive into what exactly that is, and you've obviously, what I found very and I always say this very respectfully, you also have dealt with really interesting life challenges while doing all that too.
But yes, I've been navigating. When I first started with the co-host, I was looking at probably 13 to 18 people, scheduled that all in 1 week, interviewing them, find the person who's the right goal that I wanted to share it with, for at least the first 75 episodes from season 1, season 2. So I pretty much found that person. We had a huge start, and then I started segueing from co-host content to naturally a guest. Having a guest come on would be like a co-host. They answer questions. I ask the questions. Sometimes it was just them answering questions, and that was their spotlight. But sometimes it was the back and forth. So that is what kind of get the progress kicking in. And Podmatch has been part of that journey. I've joined the network, and yeah, I think the biggest thing was always finding speakers. And I finally found a way to do that doesn't necessarily require paying like $100 just to get your podcast out there for like an event like called Podapalooza. So the networking works really well with it.
Isn't it funny when you venture in this space? I think one of the best things about it is like I've always said that podcasting kind of democratized what were previous barriers that were there. You don't have to quote unquote wait your turn to be like, oh, I want to host a show or I want to be online. You have the chance to be the captain of your own navigational system, so to speak, when it comes to getting your voice out. And then you'll find out that a lot of people think the same way you do, and in the same avenues. You're not as closed off from the world as you think that you truly are, because the podcasting and social media, the positive aspects of it, have really broken down a lot of walls for people to reach people that they want to reach.
Oh yeah, I've had guests that didn't seem like they would be a good fit, and then when we got into a personal subject that they love, I didn't never expect that transpersonal psychology would be such a spiritual breathing exercise and speaking and public speaking segue. I would have never thought that the Matrix would have this huge case study for spirituality in your choices that you make along the way. So pretty much there's different perspectives in pop culture that you can blend with other subjects that I use as a case study or combination topic to talk about these subjects at hand.
Right. Because even when you talk, like anime, and when you talk about, you're so passionate about that particular area of culture and animation and media, there's a history behind those things that involve not just the animation or the medium that you're enjoying. It's a culture, it's wrapped, it's steeped in deep history, and it's a worldwide phenomenon that really brings people together of all stars and stripes, so to speak, of all, various backgrounds, because they're enjoying what you enjoy.
Well, yeah, because when you go into Japan, their history is a little interesting when it comes to animation. Most of the boom of animation came from World War II. They used mecha and also kaijus like Godzilla as a metaphor for how they view the post-war and how they, they say that Godzilla is a metaphor for a nuclear bomb fallout, That's a
nuclear
creature
bomb.
that came from the nuclear shot, from the two nuclear bombs that we had, the atomic bomb. But
Right.
I mean, most of its animation history, it's influenced by the early advances in the golden age of the Chinese animation industry. So they took on that when the Chinese slowed down, they put it back up and it got mainstream.
Right. And you know what's fascinating? One of my favorite, animated movies of all time and is Grave of the Fireflies, right? And I
Oh my
I don't know if
gosh,
you've seen that
yes.
movie. Oh,
I loved it.
yeah, it was, I'm not a crier, and I remember reading the reviews before it actually came out, and they're like, this movie's probably gonna make you cry, and you're like, I don't think so. And I can't remember the person's story, but he made an animated, the name of the person, excuse me.
Yep.
But it was how he and
Hmm.
his sister navigated World War II, and then she was younger than him, and they were searching for food as orphans, and then eventually she
Yes.
passed away from starvation. And you're just
Yeah.
like, I didn't know an animated movie could move me to tears like that, right? It
Yeah,
was very
because
powerful.
I did that as a blog entry way while back, and I did a collaboration episode with Japan on film, and we talked about Grave of the Fireflies in that discussion
Oh my
in a
god,
deep dive.
yeah,
So I
yeah,
can imagine. I've covered it twice on two different types of adaptations of M's the Anime. So it came
yeah,
up multiple times. So
yeah.
it's
Because
definitely one
you
of those
know why?
impactful
Because
movies.
right, because sometimes there are certain films. Sometimes people kind of would turn their nose up at animated movies, right? Because if you're that I don't want to say purist, but if you're like, I can't sit through an animated movie because that's for kids, so to speak, I would encourage anybody to take a second look at that film, because it's not, it's certainly, I don't know if a live film would have did that justice because maybe that was that way of bridging that gap, so to speak, and telling the story in the way that it did. But it's a very emotionally jarring movie that requires, multiple
Yeah.
views because it's a great film.
Yeah, you can watch it once and then pick up on something, but then you watch it again, you're going to pick up on something totally different.
For
The
sure, for sure.
imagery and I guess, the haunting reality of the setting of the story is what really what really shines in the moments of what the Fireflies represent and the hope along the way.
Well, that's yeah, absolutely hope and inspiration, and then obviously the works of Miyazaki, right, which speak for itself. I remember the first time I saw
Yes,
Princess Mononoke, I was like, "Whoa!" I said, "What the heck is
yes,
this?" Right, and then you
yeah.
see Spirited Away, and I think it was Hye's Flying Castle, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
I may have butchered that name, but oh man,
No, you
Princess
did. You
Mononoke.
did right.
Yeah, Princess Mononoke was definitely, one of the, and then, what was crazy was the movie came out in 97, but it didn't make its US debut, I don't think, until like, I saw it in college. I think it came out in like US side, stateside, 2001 or 2002. So it took a couple years after the big release and what made it even crazier was the names that did the US dubbing of it were big, major US names. And you're like, why are all these stars attached to this film?
Yeah. It's quite interesting what Princess Mononoke represents. Conservation, uh, protecting the forest,
Yes,
spirits that will protect the forest, but also the interaction of human and the forest
yes.
is kind of a big one. If humanity were to come together to destroy the forest, what do we have left? I mean, that's just kind of that's the message that's usually there. So it's really good on imagery and the theme.
Correct. Do you find profound differences between U.S. animation and Japanese and Asian ones? And I only ask this because, to state the most obvious, it seems like, almost like, I don't want to say violence is, from what I've watched, it seems like there's a more acceptable
Yes.
level of violence as opposed to here where they're kind of like, that's not for kids or we don't do certain things over here. Whereas that it's more normal, like your Ninja Scrolls, right, and things like that, where it's just kind of like this is how it is, or Vampire Hunter D's, like things like that.
Yes. So some of the adaptations to the United States and Western audiences would tame down the violence to a point where instead of red, they use black sometimes,
Right.
or they use a totally different color than red, or tame down the injury. Like, for example, Hitman Reborn. There was a scene where there was a vital scene where he gets cut, but there was also a vital scene where there was a cut, but there's no blood. It's more like he just scratched, but you literally see the tail and the clothing where the original animation from the Japanese was. But they tamed it because they wanted to less focus on the damage input And yeah, there's damage, but it's mostly like, oh, they're hurting, not
Right.
necessarily near death. But they
Right.
did that in Dragon Ball too.
Mm-hmm.
There was so much blood at times in Dragon Ball. So instead of blood, they didn't even change the color. They just changed. They basically just bruised them all up
Mm-hmm.
with black Todd marks.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty much how they handled it.
Yeah.
So the more they fight, the more tired they get, and the more beat
Right.
up they are. But
Right.
that is the kind of adaptation translation from one society to another, trying to make it fit in the globalization process.
Do they find, is there a specific, what's the MPA, is there an MPAA equivalent, so to speak, over there when it comes to like the rating system, or
They
why
have
is
a
it?
rating system. They typically rely on Y7. So Y is for everybody. They don't really have a PG. They have like a TV-14, and then they have the MA. Um, they don't really. A lot of the anime will be MA over there, will be MA over here. But some of their PG related content would probably be MA over here, just depending on the context and how it's done. I mean,
What I,
Window gets MA
yeah.
automatically, so
What I find interesting is that I'm a '90s kid and late '80s kid, and I don't play video games nearly as much as I used to, just because life goes on. But I remember
yes.
playing Street Fighter. I'm still a fan of the material all the time, and then I would watch. You would watch the movie adaptation, and you'd be like, "Why isn't the movie reflecting how the video game is?" Because they had Street Fighter 2V, right? They had Street Fighter the movie, and it was like really serialized, violence. The violence that you can. I'm not out there trying to imitate those moves in real life, but it seems like anime number one is geared more towards adults over there, or people who can quote unquote. It's not childlike, right? But I'm just trying to figure out, what is it, because the influence of Disney? Is it because the influence of how traditional animation works over here, that they feel the need to tone it down? Because even at its peak, those movies still didn't really make like mainstream acceptance. You had to really like go to like Blockbuster or order them online, or they're off the regular Channel 7 Cartoon Network, so to speak.
So it's interesting how the MAA system over here works because it's such an old system. It's based off of movie ratings.
Yes.
Because those two ones that we had that we have used, we had pre-code, which was a lot of censorship, a lot of risky things you can't have, and local restrictions that were
Mm-hmm.
put on movies,
Right.
as well as national. But then when you get after like 1970, the MAA system became more universal, but certain movies was having a hard traction. Like, for example, rated R, sometimes PG-13 was in the early stages, was no PG-13. So some of them were rated R because there was no other category to put it into.
Right.
Same thing with like, the infamous NC-17.
Right.
Certain rated R's were changed in the NC-17 rating.
Right.
But because there's a place now for like TV-14 on TV and then PG-13 on movies, we have a sense of culture that is very slow and conservative. What I mean by conservative, we are conservative on how we want the audience to see content. We don't want, heavy violence, heavy nudity, heavy drugs, that type of thing in society. So we have a entire system to rate it, to filter it, the ones that are the bag eggs, so to speak.
Yeah, it's weird. The rating system from a PG-13 movie to a rated R movie is how many times you say like the F bomb in a movie. That's like the determination of like, I forgot the amount of times you can get away with it in PG-13 versus rated R over here. But what's funny is, I don't know if you're old enough to remember this movie. It was called Natural Born Killers. It was an Oliver Stone movie in
Yeah.
about 1995. It came out, and they slapped up an NC-17 rating. When you actually watch the
Yes.
movie, first of all, it's based on Charles Starkweather and his girlfriend.
Yeah.
At the time, they were in Nebraska back in like the 1940s or 50s. They went on a killing spree. But then the movie got made into, I believe, Badlands in the 70s. And then obviously that was like a kind of a take on that story with Woody Harrelson and I can't forget the other Juliette Lewis. Well, what was interesting is the movie itself isn't very violent. right? It has its scenes of it, but it was the reaction to the actual craving of the audience wanting to actually consume violence. And then the movie had to be heavily edited. And so you've seen a plethora of movies that are more violent than Natural Born Killers. But it struck a nerve with the MPAA, like, okay, well, we don't want people to actually be enjoying violence as opposed to the violence actually happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The culture shock sometimes is the biggest kicker. It's why certain ratings have been, I mean, even pre-code from 1930s to, before that, the entire movie industry was all kinds of strict.
Yeah.
You couldn't, get the green light unless you were literally a PG rating. So, like,
correct.
So pretty much, that cultural shift is still there. It's not as much, but like they still go to war on these movies sometimes. That's why sometimes they get unrated because it's just easier to have an unrated movie and not go to the MPA rating system just to change some stuff because they had to delete a scene to make it rated R.
But what's funny is that will actually make the film more popular too, because then they'll find out, oh, why was this movie? Because I think the audience is kind of caught up. And I will say, in respect to that medium, I think it's gotten a little more by default. Had to be a little more loose because you have shows like The Boys now. For a long time that was taboo to show superheroes in that light. I haven't seen Invincible, but I think it's kind of in that same realm, so to speak.
Yes,
where and people are like, well, I don't want to just see where the hero is not flawed. Like, hey, what happens if Superman really can actually abuse society as opposed to being the straight laced button up hero that he is. And that's jarring, I think, because of the natural aspects of patriotism and for the goodwill, your Captain Americas, your Supermans. It's very hard to project powerful superheroes in a bad light in this country, right? I think because that's just ingrained in our culture.
Yeah, it's just because our version of heroes, we constantly see the same rehearsed, rinse and repeat script in the storyline. Where you go into like Japan, their heroes are like, okay, the society wants to do good, but you also see the struggles of is being a hero worth it? And then you see probably villains that have a moral code that are against heroes. So the comparison there is literally like we see the heroes every day, good versus bad. They constantly throw that out, but like we don't necessarily see the consequences of actual heroes. And we have seen glimpses like Civil War and Marvel. There's also the Doom Patrol, but like, and then the cleanup crew, but like and then the Kingdom of Accords pretty much in Marvel is what is that version, and then crackdown on metahumans in DC, and then the crackdown on one of the closest you got is X-Men, Mutants, and crackdown on just powers in general for a power registry. But even that is still weaker when it compares to the overall story that heroes can actually represent.
Right. You look at probably the most famous, not probably, is the most famous of it all would be Akira Kurosawa, him and Toshiro Mifune. When it came to the number of films that they made that influenced everybody from George Lucas to Steven Spielberg to Martin Scorsese, you had the Seven Samurai, Jimbo, right? You had all these films that were made in the 40s and 50s, and 60s, where the protagonist was, for all intents and purposes, not the most straight-laced individual. And in fact, and if you were to do an American adaptation, it was quite bad, to be quite honest with you. But again, they said they had a moral code where they would sit back and say, well, I may be bad, but I don't do those things. And that, when you're hired as the quote unquote hitman playing both sides of the equation, so to speak.
Well, yeah, that's because when the anti-hero comes in so much, they don't have to represent what a hero is, but like they can also be their own vigilante or a symbol of justice for temporarily what side they choose.
Right. Yeah, I find the depth of what you know about this topic very fascinating, man. How did you get into all this, if I could ask?
Oh, what, just heroes or just pop culture in general?
Right, because it's really, I remember I rented a series one time on on when I rented it online I forgot. I remember I've watched Vash the Stampede, Trigun, and then there was another one. It was about a hitman. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to try to remember which one that was. Go 13. I think it was. Yeah,
Yeah, I heard
Go
that one. Yeah.
13 was deep.
Yes.
That was crazy.
I think that's because I absorbed so much shows, watch it from a film perspective, research for blog writing, and then and then also research shows on top 10 lists, top 5 lists, deep dive videos, genre types, and really just themed ideas. Dive into plot. Like, I think it's just a combination of the journey to watch it, the journey to research, and the journey to talk about it.
Yeah, right.
All in one. And then plus, knowing the history and then connecting the history with the trends that associated with it.
What would you encourage somebody who wanted to first get, like, where if somebody was like, hey, I want to get into anime, because there's a big difference between like Pokemon versus, and there's audiences for everybody, right? So I don't want to
I would
pigeonhole.
say focus on a genre.
Okay.
I would say focus on your favorite TV show genre. So like if you watch horror, start right there. If you like action, go to action. If you like mystery, or you like boring life, then Spice of Life is what you want. It's just depending on the genre that you like. If you love Sailor Moon so much and you want to watch other, female protagonists and female team matchups, Magical Girl is a genre. Shoujo also plays into romance. It just depends on what you like.
That's cool.
School setting is very calming for people to relate to. That's why a lot of anime takes place in school, or have school arcs, or school tournaments, festival, all that stuff. But then you also have like just the drama is pretty good. It just depends on, if you like big scale space opera battles with robots and aliens and all that stuff. Well, sci-fi and mecha
there's
have
plenty
that.
of that.
So
and then, yeah. The average person doesn't realize, like, I was a Voltron and a Transformers kid. It's like, listen, I understand that you probably thought that was an original American show. Like, hate to break your heart.
That's no, it was
Pisco Lion
outsourced from Japan.
It sure was.
Transformers was a American Japanese cooperation. So was Voltron in certain aspects.
So was Voltron. Yep.
And then you got Ultraman too. Don't forget that.
Power Rangers, yeah. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And that was Super Sentai and then Ultraman. You're like,
yes.
Oh my gosh. And you're just like,
or Super Gotcha.
Yes. One of my favorite ones, man, this is a lot of fun. I remember when I was watching on Prime a couple of years ago, I was a big fan of it. It was called Canterbury of the Iron Fortress, right?
Yes.
That was really a lot
That's
of fun.
That's like an older one.
That was I was like, holy smokes, where did this? I remember I was just scrolling. I was like, whoa, because it was steampunk, right? And it was zombies. And I was like, oh my gosh. And you're like, man, that was really, really well made.
Yeah.
So that was, I would encourage people to reach out to you because, man, being a geek in the 90s was kind of like a funny thing, but now like it's the in thing to do because the internet has really like broken down those barriers where it's okay to love a little bit of everything as long as you can be a fan of whatever you want,
I'm very a fan of retro culture. Watching He-Man to the Flintstones to old sitcoms to anything. So, I think sometimes the retro has the storytelling that's already there. Because most of the complex stories are from the 80s and 90s from animation most of the time.
Yes.
The new ones now are not too bad, but also the story is being cut down to only like less than 200 episodes.
Yes.
So you have a big shift from longevity to now less than what they used before.
Right. Where can people find Maison Collawn? Because I think, I would love to do another, I would say, I think we can dive into some fun stuff on here, especially with whatever guests you may want to bring on or, examples, reviews, because we can kind of dive into this little fun sector. You're clearly more of an expert than I am, about specific titles, but I know what I like, right? And I remember even when I was in college, when the first time I saw Trigun from a buddy with Vash the Stampede, and I was like, whoa, I was like, this is amazing. So I would love to be able to dive into this topic a little deeper with you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You can reach out to me at Podmatch. I take guests and have guests, so I could be a guest. So, Podmatch MCMA podcast. If you want to book me as a guest or have me or you be a guest, either one, you can reach out at blogmcanime at gmail.com. And then most of my inquiries, you can follow me at Facebook at blogmcanime and just see my content and or podcast directories, Apple Podcasts, Google Music, Amazon Music, and Spotify.